And now for chapters 17 and 18 of Sign of the Beaver. When Matt woke, the wigwam was dim, but the cracks of brightness around the door flaps showed that it was daylight. By the sounds, the village was up and about. He could hear men's voices, the shouts of children, and the shrill yelping of dogs. Behind these sounds there was a dull, thumping rhythm. Could the Indians still be dancing? He lay looking about him at the smoke-streaked walls of woven matting and the clutter of objects hanging here and there. Shapeless garments, cooking pots, odd-shaped bags of animal skin, bundles of dried grasses and herbs. Under the platform where he had slept was an untidy pile of baskets and rolled-up mats. From the heap of ashes in the center of the dirt floor, a wisp of smoke curled upward toward the small hole in the roof. Much of it could not escape and drifted back to hang in the thin clouds just above his head. Matt's throat felt tight with it, and he sat up coughing. Then he moved to the doorway, pushed back the flap, and stepped outside. As though they had been waiting, children came scuffling about him, their bright eyes curious. Most of them were naked as frogs. "Queb," he said uncertainly, sending them into a chorus of giggles. Matt was relieved to see Etienne approaching. "You sleep long time," Etienne greeted him. "Too much bear, I reckon." Matt smiled shamefacedly. He still found it hard to take Etienne's sober teasing. Over the heads of the children, he looked about the village. Last night in the darkness and firelight, it had appeared mysterious and awesome. Now, under the strong sunlight, he saw that it was shabby and cluttered. There were few bark cabins. For the most part, the wigwams were ramshackle and flimsy. On every side, from racks of untrimmed branches, hung rows of drying fish. Scattered heaps of clamshells and animal bones littered the ground. The Indians themselves had discarded the splendor of the night before. Some of them, like Etienne, were only of breechcloth, others faded cloth trousers and ragged blankets. The women's had replaced their bright finery with skirts and vests of dingy blue cotton. Now he could see what was making the rhythmic thumping. 2 women were pounding corn in a huge mortar made from a tree trunk, their arms alternately rising and falling. Others nearby were grinding in smaller mortars of hollowed stones. They sat close together, jabbering like blue jays. But their chatter did not for an instant interfere with the steady rhythm of their bare arms. In front of another wigwam, 2 women were weaving a basket of rushes. And Matt and Etienne passed them. They looked up with shy smiles. All the women Matt noticed were hard at work. A few very old men sat smoking in front of wigwams, and a group of boys squatted in a circle playing at some sort of game. "Where are all the men?" he asked. "Gone," Etienne said. "Before sunup. My grandfather led hunt for deer." He brought a hunk of cornbread for each of them, and munching on it they walked through the village back to the canoe. Matt kept hanging back, looking about him at the village. He wanted to stay longer. There were hundreds of questions he longed to ask, but Etienne seemed impatient. His genial mood of the night before had vanished. Without wasting a motion, he pushed the canoe into the water. A tangle of children had followed them and now stood on the bank, laughing and waving as they moved out into the river. Matt tried to find a reason for Etienne's silence. "If it hadn't been for me, would you have gone on the deer hunt with the men?" Etienne did not like the question. "Not take me," he admitted finally. "I not have gun." "You're a good shot with a bow and arrow." Etienne scowled. "That old way," he said. "Good for children. Indian hunt now with white man's gun. Some day my grandfather buy me gun. Need many beaver skins. Beaver not so many now." "I know guns cost a lot," I said. "I'll have to wait a good while for another one myself." Etienne had long since heard the story of Ben's visit. "White men can buy with money," Etienne said. "Indian not have money. One time plenty wampum. Now wampum no good pay for gun." There was bitterness in Etienne's voice. Matt understood now why Etienne had defended the beaver dam so fiercely. Was it true that beaver were getting scarce? Matt thought of the village they had just left, how very poor it seemed, how very few possessions the Indians could boast. For the first time, Matt glimpsed how it might be for them, watching their old hunting grounds taken over by white settlers and by white traders demanding more skins than the woods could provide. As they sat through the forest, he tried to think of a way to lift Etienne's gloom. "That was a mighty fine feast," he said, "and I was glad to see where you live. I'd like to go there again some day." Etienne's scowl only deepened. "My grandmother not want you go to feast," he said funnily. "My grandfather say you must. She say you not sleep in her house." "Oh," said Matt lamely. His own pleasure suddenly dimmed. So many things were suddenly clear to him. Why he had been left alone to sleep in the empty wigwam. Why Etienne had hurried him away so abruptly this morning. Etienne had been caught in a family argument and was annoyed by it. "My grandmother hate all white men," Etienne said. When Matt could find nothing to answer, Etienne went on. "White men kill my mother. She go out with 2 squaw to find bark for make basket. White men come through woods and shoot with gun. My mother do them no harm. We no longer at war with white men. Just the same they kill for get scalp. White men get money for Indian scalp, even scalp of children." Matt's indignant protest never got past his throat. He remembered that it was true, or had been a long time ago. He had heard that during the war, the Massachusetts governor had offered a bounty for Indian scalps. Etienne must have been a very small child. "My father go out on war trail," Etienne said. "He go to find white men who kill my mother. He not come back." Matt was speechless. He had never dreamed that anything like this lay behind Etienne's carefree life. He never wondered about Etienne's parents at all, only accepted without question that the boy followed his grandfather and obeyed him. "No wonder she hates us," he said at last. "Terrible things always happen when there's a war, on both sides. You've got to admit, Etienne, that there was a reason. The Indians did the same thing to white settlers. The white women were afraid to go outside their cabins. Why white men made cabins on Indian hunting grounds?" Matt had no answer to that. It was no use, he thought. The war with the French was over. The Indians and the English had made peace. But the hatred, would that ever be over? For a while, he and Etienne walked through the woods together. There was a wall between them that Etienne would never forget. In sudden panic, he thought of his own mother. Was it right for father to bring her to this place? "Does your grandfather hate us too?" he asked. Etienne did not answer first. Finally, he said, "My grandfather say Indian must learn to live with white man." It was not the answer Matt hoped for, but Sockness said he must come to the feast in spite of the grandmother. Sockness had made him welcome. "When my father comes," he said, "I want him to know your grandfather. I think they would like each other." Etienne did not answer, and they walked on in silence. Discomforted, Matt turned his attention to the trail they were following. Presently he recognized the unmistakable carving of a little animal cut into the bark of the tree. But when he turned to Etienne to boast of his recognition, he was silenced by the darkness in Etienne's eyes. Instead, without speaking, he studied the signs they passed. He marked fallen trees pointing along the path, small piles of stones, and wherever the trail seemed vanished, he discovered on a tree the sign of the beaver. When they came at last on a trail he knew well, he marked carefully the spot where the 2 trails met. Why, he thought in sudden excitement, I could actually find my own way to the village. I'm sure I could, but he did not share his thought with Etienne. He knew that unless Etienne took him there, he could never go to the village again. Sockness had only invited him to the feast out of kindness, or perhaps out of fairness for the small share in killing the bear. Would he ever be given another chance? Chapter 18. Over and over, Though he knew the number only too well, Matt counted his notched sticks. He kept hoping he made a mistake. Always they were the same. 10 sticks. That meant August had long since gone by. He couldn't remember exactly how many days belonged to each month, but anyway he reckoned the month of September must almost be over. He only needed to look about him. The maple trees circling the clearing flamed scarlet. The birches and aspens glowed yellow, holding a sunlight of their own, even on misty days. The woods had become quieter. Jays still screamed at him, and chickadees twittered softly in the trees, but the songbirds had disappeared. Twice he had heard a faraway trumpeting, and had seen long straggles of geese like trailing smoke high in the air, moving south. In the morning, when he stepped out of the cabin, the frosty air nipped his nose. The noonday was warm as midsummer, but when he came inside at dusk, he hurried to stir up the fire. There was a chilliness inside him as well that neither the sun nor the fire ever quite reached. It seemed to him that day by day the shadow of the forest moved closer to the cabin. Why was his family so late in coming? He was troubled, too, because the autumn weather seemed to have brought about a restlessness in Etienne. There were days when the Indian boy did not come. He never offered a word of explanation. After a day or two, he would simply walk into the cabin and sit down at the table. He rarely suggested they fish or hunt together. Day after day, Matt tramped the woods alone, trying to shake the doubts that walked beside him like his own shadow. As he walked, Matt was careful to cut blazes in the barks of trees. They gave him courage to walk farther into the forest than he ever dared before, since he was sure of finding his way back to the cabin. He also watched for Indian signs, and sometimes he was sure that he detected one. One day, looking up, he saw in a nearby tree the sign of the turtle. Time to turn back, he told himself. He felt secure now in the territory of the beaver, but he wasn't so certain about the strange people who would welcome a white trespasser. He started to retrace his step, but heard some distance away the sharp, high-pitched yelp of a dog. It didn't sound threatening, but neither did it sound like the happy, excited bark of a hound that had scented a rabbit. It sounded almost like the scream of a child. When it came, it died away into a lone whining, and then he remembered the trapped fox. Etienne had warned him to have nothing to do with the turtle trap, but he hesitated, and the sound came again. No matter what Etienne told him, he could not bring himself to walk away from the sound. Warily, he made his way through the brush. It was a dog, a scrawny Indian dog, dirt-caked and bloody. As Matt moved closer, he saw, through the blood, the white streak down the side of the tree, then the chewed ear and stubby porcupine quills. Only one dog in the world looked like that. It was caught by its foreleg, just as the fox had been, and it was frantic with pain and fear. Its eyes were glazed, and white foam dripped from its open jaws. Matt felt his own muscles tense with anger, his mind made up in an instant. It had been bad enough to leave the fox to suffer. Turtle tribe or no, he was not going to walk away from Etienne's dog. Somehow he had to get that dog out of the trap. But how? As he bent down, the dog snapped at him so ferociously that he leapt back. Even if he recognized him, Etienne's dog had never learned to trust him. Now was too crazed to understand that Matt meant to help. Matt set his teeth and stooped again. This time he got his hands on the steel bands of the trap and gave a tug. With a deep growl, the dog snapped at him again. Matt started, scraping his hand against the steel teeth. Matt leapt to his feet and stared at the red gash that ran from his knuckles to his wrist. It was no use, he realized. There was no way he could get that trap open with the dog in this maddened state. Somehow he would have to find Etienne. He began to run through the forest, back over the way he had come, back along the trails he knew, searching his memory for the signs he remembered that led to that Indian village. Luck was with him. There was the sign of the beaver cut into the tree, and here there were fallen logs. He was never absolutely sure, but he knew he walked in the right direction, and after nearly an hour, to his great relief, he came out on the shore of the river. There was no canoe waiting, as there had been when Etienne had led him there, but the river was narrow and placid. Thank goodness he'd grown up near the ocean, and his father had taken him swimming from the time he could walk. He left his moccasins hidden under a bush and plunged in. After a few moments, he came out dripping within the sight of the stockade. He was greeted by a frenzy of barking dogs. They burst through the stockade and rushed toward him, halting only a few feet away, menacing him so furiously that he dared not take another step. Behind them came a group of girls who quieted the dogs with shrill cries and blows. "I have come for Etienne," Matt said when he couldn't make himself heard. The girls stared at him. Tired, wet, and ashamed of showing his fear of the dogs, Matt could not summon any politeness or dignity. "Etienne," he repeated impatiently. One girl, bolder than the others, answered him, flaunting her knowledge of the white man's language. "Etienne not here," she told him. "Then Saknus." "Saknus not here. All gone hunt." Desperately, Matt seized his only remaining chance. "Etienne's grandmother," he demanded. "I must see her." The girls looked at each other uneasily. Matt pulled back his shoulders and tried to put into his voice the stern authority that belonged to Saknus. "It's important," he said. "Please show me where to find her." Amazingly, his blustering had an effect. After whispering, the girls moved back out of his way. "Come," the leading girl ordered, and he followed her through the gate. He was not surprised that she led him straight to the most substantial cabin in the clearing. He had recognized on the night of the feast that Saknus was chief. Now facing him in the doorway was a figure even more impressive than the old man. She was an aging woman, gaunt and wrinkled, but still handsome. Her black braids were edged in white. She stood erect, her lips set in a forbidding line, her eyes brilliant with no hint of welcome. Could he make her understand? Matt wondered in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he began. "I know you don't want me to come here. I need help. Etienne's dog is caught in a trap, a steel trap. I tried to open it, but the dog won't let me near it." The woman stared at him. He could not tell whether she understood a word. He started to speak again when the deerskin curtain was pushed aside, and a second figure stood in the doorway. It was a girl with long black braids hanging over her shoulders. She was dressed in blue, with broad bands of red and white beading. Strange, Matt thought, of how much alike they looked. The old woman and the girl, standing side by side, so straight and proud. "Me Marie, sister of Etienne," the girl said in a soft, low voice. "Grandmother not understand. I tell her what you say." Matt repeated what he said and then waited impatiently while she spoke to her grandmother. The woman listened. Finally her grim lips parted in a single scornful praise. "Aramis Peswat," she said. "Good-for-nothing dog." Matt's awe vanished in anger. "Tell her maybe it's good for nothing," he ordered the girl. "Etienne is fond of it, and it's hurt bad. We've got to get it out of the trap." There was distress in the girl's eyes as she turned again to her grandmother. He could see that she was pleading, and that in spite of herself the old woman was relenting. After a few short words, the girl went into the cabin and came back in a moment, holding in her hand a large chunk of meat, a small blanket folded over her arm. "Me go with you," she said. "Dog know me." In his relief, Matt forgot the torn hand he had been holding behind him. Instantly, the old woman moved forward and snatched at it. Her eyes questioned him. "It's nothing," he said hastily. "I almost got the trap open." She gave her arm a tug, commanding him to follow. "There isn't time," he protested. She silenced him with a string of words, of which he understood the only scornful "Piswat." She said, "Dog not go away. Better you come. Trap may be poison." Having no choice, Matt followed them into the cabin. He saw now that the woman's straight posture had been a matter of pride. She was really very lame, and stooped as she walked ahead of him. While she busied herself over a fire, he sat obediently on a low platform and looked about him. He was astonished that the little room, strange and so unlike his mother's kitchen, seemed beautiful. It was very clean. The walls were lined with birch bark and hung with woven mats and baskets of intricate design. The air was sweet with fresh grasses spread on the earth floor. Without speaking, the woman tended to him. washing his hand and cleaning with clean warm water. From a painted gourd she scooped a pungent-smelling paste and spread it over the wound, then bound his hand with a length of clean blue cotton. "Thank you," Matt said when she finished. "It feels better." She dismissed him with a grunting imitation of Sockness's "good." The girl who had been watching moved swiftly to the door. As Matt rose to follow her, the grandmother held him out a slab of cornbread. He did not realize how hungry he was, and he accepted it gratefully. The girl took the lead, brushing aside the curious children and the still suspicious dogs. At the river's edge, she untied a small canoe, and Matt stepped into it, thankful that his half-dried clothes would not have to be drenched again. Once on the forest trail, she set the pace, and he did not find it easy to keep up with her swift, silent pride. She was so like Etienne, though, lighter and more graceful. After a time, Matt ventured to break the silence. "You speak good English." "Etienne tell me about you," she answered. "You tell him good story." "Etienne didn't tell me he had a sister." The girl laughed. "Etienne thinks squaw girl not good for much," she said. "Etienne only like to hunt." "I have a sister, too," he told her. "She's coming soon." "What's she name?" "Sarah. She's younger than you, but Marie isn't an Indian name, is it?" Matt asked. "It's Christian name. Me baptized by father." Etienne had never mentioned a priest either. But Matt knew that French Jesuits had lived with the Indians here in Maine for long before the English settlers came. "When my sister comes, will you come with Etienne to see her?" he asked. "It might be so," she answered politely. She sounded as though it never would be. At last they heard the yelping just ahead of them, and they both began to run. Even in his terror, the dog recognized the girl and greeted her with a frenetic beating of his tail. He gulped at the meat she held out to him, but he still would not let either of them touch the trap. The girl had come prepared for this, and she unfolded the blanket she carried and threw it over the dog's head and gathered the folds behind him. With surprising strength, she held the struggling bundle tightly in her arms while Matt took the trap in both hands and slowly forced the jaws open. In a moment the dog was free, escaping the blanket, bounding away from them on 3 legs, the 4th paw dangling at an odd angle. "I'm afraid it's broken," Matt said. He was still breathing hard from the last run and from the effort of tugging those steel jaws apart. "Etienne mend," the girl said, folding up the blanket, as calmly as though she was simply tidying up a cabin. The dog hobbled slowly after them along the trail, lying down now and then to lick at the bleeding paw. They made slow progress, and now that the worry was over, Matt was aware of how tired he was. It seemed as though he had been walking back and forth over that trail all day, and the way to the village seemed endless. He was thankful when, halfway to the river, he saw Etienne approaching swiftly along the trail. "My grandmother sent me," he explained. "You get dog out?" "I couldn't do it alone," Matt admitted. Etienne watched as the dog came limping toward him. "Dog very stupid," he said. "No good for hunt. No good for smell turtle smell. What for I take such a foolish dog?" His harsh words did not fool Matt for a moment, nor did they fool the dog. The scruffy tail thumped joyfully against the earth. The brown eyes looked up at the Indian boy with adoration. Etienne reached into his pouch and brought out a strip of dried meat. Then he bent and very gently took the broken paw into his hands. That was the end of chapter 18. Chapter 18.